You should be watching this on Tuesday, the 29th. Again, like I said, I do have COVID, and I am going to be out for the rest of this week. I'll be back next week all masked up. So, yeah, you're going to have a sub for the rest of this week. So I'm just going to keep making these videos. And again, just comment in Google Classroom if you have any questions, or feel free to send me an email as well. But we're just going to pick right back up with the notes where you left off yesterday. So this should be on page 5 of your notes, I believe. So on page 5, you should have a big blank space to draw this chart, which this is going to be the organization of our nervous system, which is a little complicated. There's a lot of information that goes on here. So we're going to kind of break it down by each of those boxes. So we have the overall nervous system, which can be broken down into 2 main parts. We have our central nervous system, which we call the CNS, and we have the peripheral nervous system, which we call the PNS. The central nervous system is composed of your brain and spinal cord, and your PNS is composed of pretty much everything else. So both of those are super important. The peripheral nervous system can be further broken down into many other areas, as you can see there. First one we have is the sensory division or the motor division. That is basically the difference between taking in the information or putting out information. Below that, we have our somatic nervous system versus our autonomic nervous system, and that is pretty much if the information is going to lead to a voluntary or involuntary movement, is the difference there. And the last one we have is our parasympathetic and our sympathetic nervous system. We're going to get into a lot more detail in the following slides about all of this. Today we are actually going to primarily focus on the central nervous system. There's a lot that you need to know about the brain and spinal cord. We're going to learn about some of the different regions of the brain and labeling those areas as well. So if you didn't get this down, I would pause this video, get the chart down. Otherwise, you can go ahead and move on to the next slide. So again, like I said, the 2 main divisions of the overall nervous system is going to be the CNS and the PNS. So central nervous system is the brain and spinal cord, which makes sense because the central nervous system is going to be responsible for the integration, and it's basically the control center of our bodies. The peripheral nervous system is going to be our spinal and cranial nerves, and this is going to be super important for communication between the CNS and the rest of the body. So the peripheral nervous system is really what makes the CNS be able to have an effect on the rest of the body. So spinal nerves can carry impulses to and from the spinal cord, while our cranial nerves can carry impulses to and from the brain. So that's kind of the difference between those as well. Again, we're going to specifically focus on the CNS today. So big part of that is going to be our brain. The brain is going to be protected by the skull, and it's surrounded by layers of tissue, which we call meninges. It also is kind of floating in this cerebrospinal fluid, and that is going to help cushion the brain and help prevent any injuries from occurring. There are also different ventricles within the brain, and these are basically hollow fluid-filled cavities. These are going to help make the cerebrospinal fluid, so super important there to help protect our brain. Some kind of fun facts about the brain is that your brain is not going to be fully developed until you've gone through puberty, especially your frontal lobes, which you're going to learn about in a second. Those are super important for decision making and judgment. They say your brain isn't fully developed until around age 26. So that's just kind of a fun fact there. We've already talked before about the high metabolism of the nervous system. So our brain is using about 20% of the oxygen in our bodies and about 25% or a fourth of the glucose. So that is super important there. And most adult brains weigh around 3 pounds, so pretty heavy for an organ. If you're going to divide the brain even further, there's going to be three main parts. So the first part we're going to talk about is the cerebrum. This is the largest part of the brain, and it makes up these four different areas right here. So the blue, green, yellow, and red area right there. It can also be divided into left and right hemispheres, which the way you would look at that is if imagine you have someone standing right behind you and they're kind of looking over your head. They would just divide it right in half, and the right side would be the right hemisphere, left side is the left hemisphere. So that would be another way that we could divide the brain. But it can also be divided into these four lobes that you see on this diagram. So we have the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, and occipital lobe. Those functions in learning, speech, emotion, reasoning, vision, hearing, and fine movements. So those are all super important functions for our daily lives. The surface of the cerebrum is called the cerebral cortex, and this is going to be arranged in folds that will increase the surface area. The cerebral cortex can also be divided into different areas. There's three specific areas that we call the motor areas, sensory areas, and the association areas. But I mainly want you to focus on knowing these four lobes right there. So about 83% of our brain is made up of the cerebrum. So this is a super important part of the brain. If you think about it in terms of the left and right hemisphere, you've probably heard people say things like, oh, I'm more left-brained or I'm more right-brained. And they might be saying that because the left hemisphere of our brain is going to control things like speech, logic, sequencing, comprehension, math, and writing, while the right side of the brain is going to control things like our creativity, artisticness, imagination, intuition, and things like our musical abilities as well. So that's what people are talking about if you ever hear someone say that they're right or left brain focused. Another thing to note is that each hemisphere is going to control the opposite side of the body. So, for example, the right hemisphere of the brain is actually going to control the left side of the body and vice versa there. So that is kind of the largest part of the brain. Next part of the brain is going to be the cerebellum, which is this little section right here underneath the cerebrum. The cerebellum is super important because it is going to help maintain posture and balance, and it also helps with coordinating timing and patterns that help us maintain smooth and agile subconscious movements, so you're not thinking too much about a simple task like walking. This little section right here is going to make up about 11% of our brain's total mass. So even though it's so small and just 11% of the brain, it is still super important. Maintaining your posture and balance is something that you probably take for granted if you don't have an issue with it, but it does really affect your daily life. The last main part of the brain is going to be the brain stem, which is underneath the last two areas that we talked about. This is going to be the base of the cerebrum, and it's going to be anterior to the cerebellum. This includes a few different sections that we call the medulla oblongata, the midbrain, and the pons. This is going to be super important because it will relay information between the rest of the brain and the spinal cord. So this is what gets the information from our brain to our spinal cord and then throughout the rest of the body. So this will help coordinate a lot of our autonomic functions, such as respiration or breathing, circulation, body temperature, sleeping, digestion, and swallowing. All those functions that you don't really think about, those are going to be coordinated by your brainstem. So super important there. We don't want to have to imagine if we had to think about breathing or think about making our heart beat. It would be impossible to do other daily tasks if you were so focused on just trying to stay alive. So those are super important functions of the brainstem here. That is all we're going to cover with the central nervous system today. If you guys have not already finished the rest of your inquiry activity from yesterday, it should be, I think it started on page 12, but it should go through page 19. So you should do pages 12 through 19 with that. When you finish that, we'll go over it on Thursday since you guys didn't get through it yesterday. So finish that, and then if you finish up with the inquiry activity, go ahead and keep working on your Concept 1 study guide. Again, that will probably be due with your final, so you'll have a little bit more time to work on that since we're not having a separate test over this concept. But go ahead and work on the inquiry activity. Again, it's pages 12 through 19, and then work on your study guide if you finish with that. All right, have a great rest of your Tuesday.